Well, hi everybody, Bruce here, and today we're going to talk about the GR-55. Roland has really come a long way with this concept. I had one of their very first designs back in 1984, 1985, something like that, and it was really not too much more than a novelty at that time. Now they've really brought it a long way. The main thing is that they're trying to avoid all of the miscuing and all the problems that occur of trying to translate the frequency of the string to a specific MIDI signal internally that will control the synthesizers. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to control this machine and try to avoid all of the problems that everybody seems to have trying to play a guitar synthesizer. Let's talk about some of the parameters in the GR-55 that can affect your playing and some of the different reactions that you get from the system while you're playing. Usually we're going to be starting off here with our main display, and if we want to get into the setup menu, we want to hit edit, and then we want to hit the page. I haven't pressed it yet, because what happened when we press the edit button is we typically come up with the parameters for that particular tone that we've got. Now I'm going to press the right page. We're into effects. We're going to press it again. We're into master, and then we are going to step over here to the system. When we're in the system, this is the first selection here is what we want, so we just press the enter button here and we get our GK settings. Now this first page here is just your pickup types and all. There's not really too many parameters here that you want to adjust, so I'm going to hit my page right button again and come over here to something called distance. Now the distance you see here are the measurements, very accurate measurements in millimeters of the distance between your bridge and your pickup. Here is the distance measurement that they're talking about. It's the distance between where the string touches the bridge and the edge, this edge of the split pickup here. Back to our parameters again on the GR-55, I'm going to hit my page right button again, and we're going to come over here to this page called sensitivity. Now sensitivity, what you do is when you have your guitar hooked up to this display and this display up, you just play each one of your strings and you will see this bar chart over here, this kind of volume indication coming up here. What you want is you want it up here someplace where it's not maxed out, but at the same time you want it up here somewhere in the top 1/3 or 1/4. You want those bars to come over here, and you want them all to be the same. So you play through all your strings and you adjust your sensitivity so that your all of your strings are reacting about the same. Now the next two pages have some parameters that you might be tempted to change. The next page is the velocity page. These values, along with the next page after that, which is nuance, dynamics, I would not suggest changing those. I have tried changing them, and what happens is you have the law of unintended consequences where your sensitivity is reduced. You reduce the amount of mistriggering and noise, but the price that you pay is that you reduce the sensitivity on the strings and make it even more difficult to play. So I would not change those. I would just change any settings in here that allowed you to have an even response to each one of your strings individually so that they're all the same. And the page before that, make sure that these are somewhere in the ballpark in terms of the distances between your bridge and the pickup. Okay, while we're here, I'd like to show you something that was, to me at least, not very intuitive and caused me quite a bit of grief in trying to figure out how to make this work, and hopefully it will save you some time. And that is, just like on my RC300, I like to use the pedal as a volume pedal. more than anything else. And let me show you here how to set up the volume pedal on the GR-55. And it's, to me at least, it was a little bit tricky. So what you want to do is you want to come over here. Now you can set it up per, this is under user, so this is something that's editable. Per tone or per setting, you can set up whether or not you want it as a volume pedal or an effects pedal or whatever. So I'm going to come on over here and hit the edit, and we come up into our typical screen where we have all the different oscillator parameters for this particular sound. Now I'm going to hit the page right button because I'm going to start paging across these things here. So I'm going to hit the page right once, we're into effects. Hit it again, we're into master. Now you might think that because this says pedal and GK control that the controls for your volume pedal would be under here. So let me press the enter button and let's see what's under this particular menu selection. And what you will see here is as I step through, I'm going to page over through all of these settings here. So now we have expression, expression on, expression switch. You notice that they're all saying system. What that's trying to tell you, I believe, is that those settings are not under this menu right now. They're under the system menu. It's telling you go to the system menu. So let's exit this, and then we're going to step over here to this system menu by hitting the page right button once again. I'm going to step over to the system menu, and typically what will happen is that you will be when you get to the system menu, you might be over here in this far left icon where we were before, this GK settings. So you don't use your page here, you use your increment right button here. So I'm going to press this here and come over to this icon, which says exactly the same thing that that other one did. It says pedal GK control, and I'm going to enter. And now we're going to take a look here and see what we've got. I'm going to page over to the left, and it says pedal, it says control. Trying to read through the camera here. It says control function off. Let's page over one more, and it says expression off. And then when this says expression on function, all these are off. So let's go back to the control and see what's underneath this in terms of selection. So I'm going to use my increment down, and I'm going to come up with nothing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my wheel here, and I jog my wheel here, and it says patch settings, and then it says hold, and then it says tap tempo, and it gives me all of these different selections here. The one of which seems most appropriate is patch settings. So now let's go over to the next page, click that. Now we're into the expression pedal, and it says expression function off. I use my jog wheel and I get patch settings and I get patch volume. Hot dog, that's what we want, patch volume. Okay, now I'm going to step over to the expression on selection, see what's under that, and it says patch settings and patch volume. So now I have I've set up the control as patch settings, and then the expression pedal as patch volume, and the expression on as patch volume. And now we have our expression pedal set up as a volume pedal. So what we want to do now is we want to exit. Gives us that. Exit again. Gives us back to that. And then we want to write that new information into the setting. So I want to write it here. And now we've got our volume pedal set up. Now once you've got your GR-55 set up reasonably well, you're going to find that 95% of your success is related to your playing technique. So let's select some patches here that are standard patches, not ones that I've modified, so you can reproduce these experiments. Now you will find that some patches are very easy to play and some patches are very difficult to play. Okay, this is a string ensemble pad which is fairly easy to play for several reasons. One of which is that there's not a lot of string sensitivity here. You don't hear any noise when you slide your fingers on the strings. Now, other patches you will. Also, you have a long decay time, as I mentioned, which allows you to mute the strings and then move on to a new chord while the last one is still ringing. So that's a big help. And since this is a pad, I'm going to typically be playing chords. So the trick is going to be to lay the chord down very nicely and cleanly and make sure that nothing touches an adjacent string. So for instance, in this case, my ring finger here could barely touch that fifth string. It will give a miscue to the synthesizer and it will come up with a terrible sound. So we want to make sure we avoid that. We place the chord down very cleanly, we strike it cleanly, and then we mute it. Like that, okay? Then we move on. Now you can do that with a pick. You strike with the pick, and then you can mute it with the palm of your hand. You hear the miscue there? That's better. Okay, so what you'll find is for every time you do anything different, if you switch from fingerstyle to a pick, or even if you switch from one patch to another, you have to get used to how that patch is going to behave, because each one of them behaves a little bit differently. And you will find what works with each one of these patches, but it's almost as if you have to learn or play a certain technique with each one of the patches individually. But the key thing is to have a clean placement of your chord, and then have a clean strike, and then have a muting of those strings that have been struck before you move your left hand. And that's really the basis of the technique that I think is successful for playing the guitar synthesizer. Okay, here's another patch, a Rhythm 17-1, that doesn't have as long a decay time, but is still rather easy to play. So let's try that. Now, having less decay time just means that we are going to have to be a little bit more careful when we do our chord transitions. It will be a little bit less forgiving. And what that means is we have to make sure that we're completely muted before we move our left hand. You might not have been able to hear it, but I heard a miscue in there, and I'm going to try to do it again without that miscue. The reason why it miscued was that I moved my hand before I had, my left hand, before I had completely muted it with my right hand. Or to be more realistic, what happened was I muted it with my right hand, but then I took that mute off while I moved my left hand, and that caused a miscue. So this time I'm going to make sure that I keep my mute on when I move my hand. And that worked much better. It kind of is a transition between some of the more rhythmic instruments and some of the lead instruments. You know, we started out with the rhythm category in the instrumentation pads, and then we are moving now, still in the rhythmic section, we're moving towards instruments that can be used as both accompaniment and lead. This is a nice transition. This is one of my favorite patches. I think this is a very beautiful sound. This is one that works really well, not only as a chord, but also as lead and finger picking or arpeggio style. Let me play this for you. Now, hear that? Quite a bit different, isn't it? So that's because it has a compressor in it. Anytime you have a compressor, all the small sounds are going to be amplified and all the large sounds are going to be attenuated. So this is what you have to be careful about whenever you have a compressor in the loop. But this, it's still a pretty forgiving patch. and it's fairly easy to change chords without it tweaking out on you. Although you can, if you're real sloppy, you'll get some really bad sounds out of this. But if you're halfway careful, it'll sound pretty good. So fairly long decay, and yet it has a very nice staccato attack. It's got that compressor in there, so that gives you a nice clean sound. You can also so when you can do something like that with one of these patches, that means that the modeling is turned on and that it's reading the guitar as a guitar. So in this one we have you can hear both that pad in there, a couple variations. You have kind of the string sound, and then you have a chorus sound, and then you have that guitar sound that allows you to have a nice clean lead part. Alright, this patch, Rhythm 04-1, is called a double low piano. And you notice that it's entered in the rhythm category. Let me show you, there are other pianos that are entered into the lead category. Let me show you why this one works for both the rhythm and the lead part. So this patch is, you could play chords with it. And you could also play lead. Now, usually when I play lead, I always pick up my pick. And the reason is because, as you will see, you really need to mute the strings with the palm of your hand. So if I'm going to play one little miscue in there. So as I said, each one of these patches you have to kind of adjust your style. It's not that difficult, but you almost have to adjust to each particular patch. Now I'm going to get into the techniques that I use now for playing lead. Since we're here, this is kind of a transitional one. It's kind of good for chords and kind of good for lead. When I'm playing lead with synth, which is some of the hardest part to do, especially because you might be 20 seconds into a perfect lead and all of a sudden you get a terrible miscue and now you have to throw it away. What I like to do is I like to mute the guitar strings with the palm of my hand, and I mute everything including the note that I'm playing. But then what I do is I ease off the mute and allow that string to ring. So I muted all 6 strings, including the one that I just played. Okay, just to finish up, now we're going to take another piano, and this piano sound is quite different, and you notice that it is categorized under the lead. It's a lead 07-1. Okay, we're going to play with that now. Now you'll notice that in the last piano that we played, that you had the ability to play chords. It sounded pretty reasonable. If I'm going to play the same chords with this grand piano patch, it sounds okay, but a little bit harder to control. See what I mean? But the main thing I want to show you is when you take a patch, this is probably not the worst patch, but it is a good example of a patch that's going to give you some pause when you're playing a lead part, and you will not be successful at playing. This is a good patch to practice on because you will definitely know whether you're figured out the technique or not. And So that technique that I told you about, getting a miscue on that note right there. See, now I pay more attention to that note. So when you practice, you can almost tell where you're going to have the problems. So I would feel comfortable playing a lead now, and I figure I could probably play the whole lead and not screw up anywhere and have it miscue. Once I just get the feel of that patch, see, the first couple of times I played through it was rougher, now it's smoother. And what's happening is you are learning how to mute the strings, how much to mute the strings. In other words, you move this hand up and down this way. Do I need to mute it just a little bit, or do I need to mute it a lot? But I am muting all 6 strings, and even the string that I'm playing. And in this case, I'm muting them quite heavily. So I hope that this information has helped you to overcome some of the frustrations that you might have encountered while you're playing the GR-55 guitar synthesizer, because it can be very frustrating. And you have a nice piece of equipment, and if it's not working for you, then that's not too good. So I hope this will help you. And if I were to summarize the entire lesson here, what I would say to remember is that you always want to mute those strings. You can even mute them while you're playing them, but you want to make sure that they're muted before, during, and after the chord changes, or even the single lead note changes. And to make sure that you have everything muted before you move your left hand, because that, in combination with the fact of having a slight touch of maybe a fingertip on another string, those two things are what cause the majority of the miscues that you get with the GR-55. So I hope this was helpful. Leave some comments below and let us know how you're doing and how you're making out, and I'll see you in the next video. You take care now.